G'day, g'day. It's Nick and welcome to Wicked Wildlife. Now, most of the subscribers to our show are probably familiar with Aztec, our alpine dingo. But in the last video we did featuring Aztec, one of you guys actually asked us a question, and that is whether or not dingoes are dogs. And if not, what's the difference? So stay tuned, guys. We're having another chat about dingoes. They're pretty dangerous. For more Wicked Wildlife encounters, this is Tully, our resident scrub member to our wild family here. Here in Australia, have a look. We've got two different undertakes with fun today. I hope you have a great one and take care. So the way that we break animals down into families and groups is what we call taxonomy. And basically it's how we lump animals together based on how related they are and the traits that they share. Now the taxonomy of the dingo is something that people have gone back and forth for an awful long time. In the 1780s, when people first arrived in Australia and discovered these guys, there was a few different names proposed, but the one that basically people settled on for the next 200 years was Canis lupus familiaris, which is a subspecies of the grey wolf, and then the domestic dog, familiaris, dingo. So he was classified as a domesticated breed of dog, basically owned by the Aboriginals. Now, it stayed this way for 200 years or so, and until 2005, when a study basically moved these guys to Canis lupus dingo. So rather than a domestic dog, their own subspecies of the grey wolf in its own right, based on a couple of physiological traits that we'll talk about a bit later on. Then another 10 years almost passed, and a new study with new DNA and a newer result reclassified them again to Canis dingo, and that's basically where they stand today. So it means that they're not a dog, they're not even a wolf, they're a canid, just like jackals and wolves and coyotes in their own right. Now, a lot of people might disagree with this for a few different reasons, which we'll have a bit of a look at. So one of the reasons that most people have for a long time lumped dingoes and domestic dogs together is, of course, that dingoes and domestic dogs have the ability to interbreed. It's, for a start, why there's been so many hybrid animals running around the world, and it's also how we've got breeds such as Missy, the Australian Kelpie and the Australian cattle dog as well, due to crossing European-style dogs with dingoes to harden them up. So they definitely can cross. Now, you can't blame people for saying, well, this means they're the same species, because in high school biology, most people are taught that if two animals can breed and produce fertile offspring, they have to be the same species. Now, the Canis family, or the Canis genus, is actually really good at breaking this rule. In fact, almost all the species within the genus Canis can actually interbreed and produce fertile offspring. You see, grey wolves and coyotes, Canis lupus and Canis latrans, are well documented to cross in captivity and even in the wild under natural circumstances, out in America where people are calling coy wolves. The red wolf, Canis rufus. In fact, there isn't a single red wolf today that people have managed to test that doesn't have coyote genes in it. So Canis rufus and Canis latrans are able to crossbreed. In Russia, there's a domestic dog called the Sulamov dog, which is 25% jackal. So Canis aurorus and Canis familiaris. So all of these canids are able to interbreed without being the same species. So it's not really a given that if two animals can breed, doesn't mean dingoes have to be domestic dogs. The other reason that these guys sort of get lumped with domestic dogs is the very dog-like relationship that they shared with the Aboriginal people. Now, some of the differences with this, however, is on other continents where people interacted with the wolves that turned into the domestic dog, very early on, over 10,000 years ago, they started actually selectively breeding animals, pairing them up to produce the animals that they wanted. The dingo, on the other hand, had none of this. They were basically left as a wild animal, they were collected as puppies, reared in the family, and they paired up as they saw fit. So there was no selection by people. It's probably more resemblant of the relationship that other ethnic groups have with certain wild animals. For instance, there's a group in Nigeria where the people basically rear and spend their lives with hyenas. There's groups in Mongolia who for a long time have kept golden eagles as part of their communal custom. It's the way they live. And the dingo's relationship is a bit more like that, kind of like the American Indians' relationship with horses. They're an important animal to them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they were picking this one and putting them together. And humans have spent their lives with lots of different animals. It just happens that this one looks, to the untrained eye, similar to what we expect from the domestic dog. Just because he lived in a similar way doesn't mean he has to be a dog. So if these guys aren't domestic dogs, what are the differences with a dingo and a domestic dog? Now there's a whole heap of very subtle differences, but some of the big ones are their teeth. Dingoes, compared to a domestic dog of the same size, have significantly larger canines, the long pointy ones, and carnassials, the stuff for tearing meat. So their dentition is very different. Their skull morphology is very different. The ridges and the way that their skull's put together is different to any domestic dogs we have today. Their head is the widest point of their body, whereas domestic dogs, even very big buff-headed domestic dogs like the staffies and things, have shoulders even wider. Whereas wild canids generally have a head that's wider than their body, because it means if their head fits through a hole or a nook or a cranny, their body's going to fit through as well. So their head, their teeth, but another big one is their breeding cycle. You see, domestic dogs breed every 6 months, and a couple of breeds of dogs come into heat every 12 months. But even the dogs that breed annually, it doesn't have anything to do with the seasons. Basically, it just goes around and round on a calendar, and when that time comes, she comes in a heat. Dingoes, on the other hand, have a breeding cycle that's very tied in with the seasons. These guys only breed in a couple of months of the year, and basically, it's in the few months leading up to June. It means that puppies are all born by sort of during the winter period. They're up and about and ready to eat meat by the time all the other baby animals and easy pickings are also out and about. So this can't be changed. This is the way that they're programmed, whereas no domestic dog has that same trait. On top of this, in domestic dogs, females have this cycle, but males are fertile all year round. Whereas several studies in dingoes have found a very significant drop in testosterone, which is basically the hormone with the will to breed, outside the breeding season. So these guys, the males even cycle at the same time. So once we realise that the fact that dingoes can breed with dogs, and the fact that they lived in a sort of semi-dog-like relationship with Aboriginal people, both of these things don't necessarily mean that they were dogs. On top of that, as we said, there's some physical traits, such as their skull morphology, their dentition, and physiological traits, such as this breeding cycle, that also make them very different to dogs. Altogether, there's really ample evidence to support the current taxonomy of Canis dingo. They're neither a dog, they're neither a wolf, they're in the same family, and they quite possibly share ancestry way further back, but they're a species in their own right, which is why it's so important that we conserve them. So on top of that, guys, I'd like to say if you do enjoy the video, please subscribe to our channel, leave us a comment. We're always looking for more ideas. If you're liking the dingo videos in particular though, I'd like to send you to another channel as well. There's a new channel called D is for Dingo, started by a friend of ours, and it's basically all about dingo education. So please, guys, if you love dingoes, check them out, but make sure you come back here. Other than that, guys, be nice to wildlife, have a good one, and take care.